Awesome. Great. So I'll skip the stuff about you and your role because we've obviously got that from the previous interview.
Cool.
So we'll start with social media strategy because that's on the first one. So within the context of social media strategy, are there any platforms or tools that you use regularly?
It's always changing. I'm always trying different tools. I mean, you're talking about off of the platforms themselves, aren't
exactly. Yeah. Any tools to craft or create content, etc.
Yeah, interesting. There's none that I use regularly at all. I've tried quite a few of them. I guess the one that I probably use most consistently is Evernote. Like I do craft posts in advance these days, and I do have a system for creating content. And when I'm writing long form articles for LinkedIn, that's a bit of a process. I use a mixture of actually writing and curating. So when I decide what topic I want to write on, I will gather a lot of resources from around the place and amalgamate a lot of the information which I think is useful. And so it does take it is a process before I get one to a level where it's ready to publish, because it needs to be quite long. It's the same with writing blog posts, it's no different, but I just publish them on LinkedIn. And I've found also that with the blog posts, and this is probably relevant on social media as well, that if you go back and edit old content and bring it up to date, it does bring it back to life. And even adding content. So Neil Patel, who's an SEO guru who's very well known for his blog posting strategy, he will write a 2,000 word article. It'll rank an index on Google, and then at some point he'll go back and turn it into a 10,000 word article.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's quite a big name, isn't he?
Yeah.
Awesome. Within the context of social media strategy, so what are your first steps in developing a social media strategy?
So with any social media strategy, I always start with the objectives. It's crazy, but it's something that we see missed the most. You know, people talk a lot about how social media is imperative these days, and if you're not on social media, then your business could be extinct in 5 years. But what people don't talk about is a lot of people do dive into social media, but do it wrong, and it's just as deadly. So if you're diving in without a strategy, first of all, you need to know who your audience is, and that's the most important thing that people miss. And what do they care about? And then, what are your objectives? What are your goals? What are your metrics? So in order to measure success, I think everything needs to come back to return on investment at some point. Obviously you can use vanity metrics and things like that. If you're looking at things like likes and engagement and the number of followers, that really is only useful in the context of the amount of people you're going to be able to reach. Of course, if you get more engagement, you're going to get in front of more eyeballs, but what's the point of that? Like, how does that translate into return on investment? Like, what are the stages that influence people at different stages of the customer journey? And so with social media strategy, different platforms, you need to provide content in different contexts. So first of all, you need to respect the platform, provide the information in the context of the platform, and then you also need to think about the audience. So LinkedIn, for example, is an area which I'm quite active on, but you can't sponsor posts from a personal profile on LinkedIn. So everything that I post on there from a personal profile has to cater for the awareness stage of the customer journey, because we don't have any metrics to know whether or not somebody's further down the customer journey or not. So respect the platform, respect the audience, and respect what stage they are at in the customer journey.
I think you just answered like 5 questions. Awesome. There we go. Definitely have to cut that one off. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How do you go about defining your audience personas? Sorry, I realised I had an upward inflection because I wasn't too sure about ask whether how many, but yeah. How do you go about defining your audience personas?
It's a really good question because quite often, like, I'll ask a client, who's your target market? And I've very rarely come across a client where they're like, oh yeah, here's our personas, there you go. This is who we target. Most of the time they don't know. So we have to go even one step back and talk about their business and what they want to achieve, like, overall, and forget about the social media side for a second. One thing about social media is the more targeted you are, the better the results. That's pretty much across the board. So like in the old days, if you came to me and said, oh, we target vegan bodybuilders that live in Tasmania, I'd say, well, that's not going to work. It's too small a market. Whereas these days, I would say that's exactly the sort of business that would do really well. So first of all, it's about being laser targeted, because I think businesses traditionally, like if they're not used to growth, they think that they can't get away with targeting. They think that they need to be, have a broader target market. Financial advisors are a great example. So like if they want to grow their business, normally what they do is they go, well, we'll help these people as well. We'll help these people. We'll bolt on this service. We'll bolt on this service. We can do anything you want with financial services. We just want to target people who can afford us, right? Whereas if you said, okay, well, we're the SMSF specialist for dental practitioners, you actually get better results. But because they've never actually had any success with marketing, they don't think that's possible. So just being well defined, and then in the context of my own business is probably a good way to look at it from like, how do I define the personas? I will just literally pick my 3 best clients, and I just ask them the questions and write them down, their names, everything, how many kids they have, like what do they do for fun, all that sort of stuff, and that's where I start. You could always mold them as you go, but why not start with your existing clients? Yeah.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah, that's within the context of audience personas, are there particular elements you always look to flesh out, like particular elements of that persona?
Yeah, decision-making process is a big one. Like how they make decisions, what's their process for making a decision, who influences their decision, which social media platforms are they using, which social media platforms do they trust, why, which platforms do they not trust, which platforms are their wife using or their husband using, which platforms are their kids using. Like normally, if you ask open-ended questions like that, they'll start giving you the information that's relevant. But it's just a matter of communicating. Like I think the wrong thing to do is to sit in a boardroom with all your executives and try and work it out without speaking to your customers, because they're the ones with the answers. I think there's a lot of companies and a lot of individuals that are in their own head when they're putting together their social media strategy, and it's all about the audience. It's all about the customer journey. So I think marketing these days is closer aligned to sales than it was in the past. Like if you really understand, like customer behavior was a sales job before, but now that 80%, some people say 55%, some people say 80%, but anyway, more of the customer journey is happening online. And so you have to understand like what is that actually mean? Like where are they hanging out? Where are they making their customer journey? And if you like simplified it down, and let's say for example, like somebody is making a decision to buy from you online and it's going to take an hour of their time. What are they doing during that hour, and how can you occupy as much of that hour as possible to influence their customer journey? Because ideally, you'd be in front of them for the whole 60 minutes. They go on Google, they find you there. They go on to LinkedIn, they find you there. They'll check on Facebook, you're popping up there too. And in every platform, you're doing it in the right context that the platform caters for. So you're not posting the same stuff on LinkedIn as you are on Facebook. It's not the right context.
Yeah, awesome. I think that leads into the next question perfectly. What are your tips when it comes to selecting networks to deploy for any social media strategy?
Yeah, it's a really good question as well. I think where people are making their decisions is important, like influencing people in the customer journey. But at the same time, it has to be practical. I don't do Snapchat, for example, for business, because in order to be competitive on Snapchat, you really need to be on there. You need to be posting at least 20 times a day, and it's just not realistic for me. So I don't use it. But having said that, I've got into Instagram and I use Instagram stories. I wouldn't say 100% use it for business just yet, but it's definitely moved in that direction. Like I made the profile public 2 years ago now, I think. And so it's gone from 300, 400 friends to 30,000 followers, and it is just getting more and more active. So it's almost got to a point now where I can't ignore it. It will overtake my LinkedIn following pretty soon, which is interesting. But those stories on Instagram you need to be posting daily, and they're the ones that seem to grow your following. And then you just got to think as well, what medium are you best suited to? Like video is something that I find works extremely well across the board. It wasn't something that necessarily, it didn't come naturally to me, but I always did like speaking from stage and webinars, so there's always video content that can come from that. But traditionally on like LinkedIn, for example, they didn't have video, so I used to write long form articles, and I still do that. It's very time consuming. So if you're good at writing, write. If you feel comfortable doing videos, do videos, and play to your strengths. Don't force yourself to do writing if it's not something that comes naturally to you. I would just focus on what you're good at and double down on that for sure.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
And it's Bibby Smalls on Instagram, isn't it? That's a nice little catch there.
Yeah. It still remains to be put on any of my marketing or anything.
yeah. Don't worry, I still have my email account from when I was 13, which is mad_mofo. So yeah.
I changed it. I thought now I'm professional. I'll make it Nathanial Bibby or something, and then I missed Bibby Smalls. I thought, what if someone else registers it?
Yeah, exactly. It's what's on your old ID. 100%, yeah. Where were we? Cool. Yeah. I guess this sort of once again ties in perfect. How do you go about developing content for social media?
So again, this is something that I've been improving lately. Like I work back from the strategic side. So who am I targeting? And then I create what I call content pillars. So I think what most people do is they think of like content ideas and they make a whole list of them, and then that's how they produce their content. Whereas if you create content pillars, what it is it's something that will never run out of content ideas. Because you think about it, like why should we run out of content ideas? As long as you're talking to someone who's got a problem, there should always be content, right? You just got to have something that facilitates, that will draw content out of that. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So I've got two big content pillars, which is a Q&A format where somebody posts pretty much anywhere online with the hashtag AskNat. Very similar to Ask Gary V, where if they post with Ask Nat a question, I will generally make a video about it and answer it. And so that way I know that I'm serving the needs of what the audience wants. So with the content pillars, it draws content out of these categories, I guess. So Ask Nat's a great one because people ask questions and I know it's exactly what my audience wants. And so I can create like individual videos that cater for that. And also I wanted to leverage from other entrepreneurs and their networks. So I have this series called LinkedIn Heroes, hashtag LinkedIn Heroes, and I interview entrepreneurs making an impact. By default, like because I was focused on LinkedIn, the videos have a limit of 10 minutes. And so the interviews were very short, which has actually been quite cool because it's different to a lot of the other, longer form podcast interviews, quite snackable content, we get direct to the point. And I interview entrepreneurs. Well, like I was joking around to the guy that Chris that runs Startup Grind here in Australia. And I said, what's your criteria for picking, people to interview at Startup Grind? He goes, I just interview who the fuck I want to interview. I don't know if you can swear in this, we can always beep it out.
Yeah, why? No.
But I do look for people that also have a social media following, because if you think about it, like if you're interviewing somebody and they're going to share it with their networks, then of course that's a great way to grow your following. And so LinkedIn Heroes, as long as there's entrepreneurs that I haven't interviewed on the planet, I'm not going to run out of content there. So those two pillars make it very easy for me to keep creating content. And then I think aside from that, you have to have at least 2 or 3 categories that you speak on, which don't have to be necessarily relevant to what you do, but they do have to be relevant to the audience. And so the what's it called again? The mere exposure effect. The mere exposure effect basically is a psychological phenomenon that says, like, if somebody gets more impressions or sees more of you, they're more likely to trust you and therefore more likely to buy from you. And so brands have been using this since they started advertising. And like in the old days, you'd see 3 or 4 billboards. They've got more exposure than the company that doesn't have any billboards. Therefore, you're more likely to trust them, more likely to buy from them. So these days, like they say, the experts say that you need 24 exposures to feel comfortable with a brand before you buy from them. So quite often I think about social media like that. So I think, how do I get 24 exposures with a potential client so they like, know, trust me, feel comfortable enough to buy from me as opposed to my competitors. But the mere exposure effect can have a negative effect as well, because if you're constantly 24 times putting a call to action in front of someone, you're going to piss them off. And so you want to do it in a way that, like, you know, if you've got a bit of knowledge about something and you can add value to someone's life, then that's a positive exposure and you're going to build positive brand sentiment.
Awesome, fantastic. I'll try to stick to this because that sort of mental mark. Another question for later, that's all. With that one. Once you've developed a strategy for yourself or for a client, how do you then ensure it's implemented correctly?
So it's about having a system for measuring success and then refining as well along the way. So I think it's also important not to do it too often. You need to give the strategies a chance to play out. And so we've got a very basic review process every month, and then every quarter we'll do something quite detailed. So we give things a chance to play out. I think the social media, the leads quite often, it can have a longer sales process, can also have a shorter sales process. It just depends where you're picking people up in the customer journey. So if you're picking people up earlier in the customer journey, of course, you can't expect return on investment to happen immediately because they're going to need to move through the other stages. So to give you an example, like when I started doing lead generation through social media, it was all about outreach. And so we're reaching people before they realize that they have a need. And so therefore they're earlier in the customer journey. The sales process generally was about 3 months, whereas normally if like somebody's contacting me from a Google ad, it's like, you know, less than that, 3 or 4 weeks. But whereas now that I'm posting content and we've got thought leadership out there and there's people that are like consuming content for a year or two and then all of a sudden they contact me, the sales process then it can be like a matter of days because they've been exposed to my content and know what I do and they're ready to buy.
Yeah, awesome. Obviously social media is free, but when it comes to budgeting for social media, how do you plan and implement a budget for social?
Yeah, again, it's just work back from the objectives. So normally, like if there's some growth objectives or volume of leads objectives, then that's a great way to start. And social media is free, but if you're posting on social media organically to generate return on investment, it's as a content strategy, it's not scalable. Like from an outreach strategy, yes, it's scalable. You just contact more people, you can get more return on investment. But from a content perspective, like if you're posting, every day and you're reaching 10,000 people, how do you then scale that up 10 times? So you literally have to put a paid budget behind it. And so, like if you get to a point where your sponsored campaigns are generating return on investment, that's a good spot to be in because you can scale from there. So the big companies that I do a lot of training for like Westpac and Harvey Norman and Count Accounting, like they're not really interested in what sort of organic strategies I have because it's not scalable. And so they're literally looking for how do we get some content that we can put a paid campaign behind that's going to generate return on investment that we can use to scale. And so I think that's a really interesting model, a really interesting space. So what most social media companies will do, and this is just self-preservation, they're just trying to protect themselves, is they create all these metrics that don't matter so that they can make it like, so they don't have to translate everything back to return on investment, right? And so it's like, okay, we've got this many impressions, we build brand sentiment by this much, blah, 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 all these things which sound really good, but unless it's translating to return on investment, then you still got an issue because you don't know whether or not it's making the business any profits or not. So I think that's a really interesting space. Yeah.